Thank you, Prof, for seeing you. Professor, I can see you.
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for joining. Yes, we are about to start. And of course, I want in a very special way to invite all of you to this very important webinar. It's a webinar that we trying to unpack the budgets that were just read the other day. And obviously we have the best panelists anyone can have in this region. And I want to thank them in a very special way for creating time to be with us this afternoon. And I would, of course, invite others to, of course, participate. We'll be having, of course, receiving questions. And of course, our technical team is taking note of all this. So feel free to ask our panelists, our honorable panelists, any question that you think it's important. We're very lucky to have them, obviously. And I thought maybe before we start in a very special way, as you all know, this week we lost one of our long-serving members and of course, directors of the East African Business Council, Ambassador Kelly Kihilu. You all know Kelly Kihilu. I'm sure you must have interacted with Ambassador Kelly Kihilu in one way or the other. His passion for the region, his passion for linking and strengthening private sector in the region. And therefore it's important that we accord him at least a minute of silence as a way of respecting him. And of course, the kind of work that he contributed to the community. So therefore, before we start, let's do that. As you know, we did that last week in respect to His Excellency, the President of Burundi. For those who are not there, we did that. We gave a minute of silence as a head of state. But now today we want in a special way to give a minute of silence to Ambassador Kelly Kihilu. I'm sure most of you know him. So just a minute of silence. Thank you very much. May his soul rest in peace. So let me welcome you all. Thank you. Yes, thank you. Thank you. You all know who Kelly was in this region. Therefore, now I want to invite all of you to join by first and foremost appreciating the presence of our eminent panelists and of course all of you participants. But we go straight to before we do that, we go to the rules that we are going to do in this, and of course, so that we can communicate. It's only fair that we have if we are not talking or not contributing, we just mute our phones. That becomes easy for us to, of course, speak and of course to respect the speakers. And of course, the views that the panelists are going to have, it's only fair that we interact with them by asking questions. Once you send your questions through, we'll be able now to bring it back to them. And of course, all this is geared, any queries should be geared to the goals, objectives of this meeting, which is basically trying to have a digest of the budgets of the ESC that were read this week. And of course, straight to the point, in the interest of time, which will be largely focusing on the regional perspectives. And obviously the questions will be sent to the chat room. And just for information, this meeting will be recorded for reporting and of course for sharing with so many others of our stakeholders, and therefore I hope that you don't mind. So any contribution or any submissions will be on record. Let me start. Obviously, I've invited all of you. I want to start by recognizing our panelists this afternoon. You all know that, of course, we have Professor Maggie Kikozi. She's here with us. And thank you very much, Professor, for creating time to be with us. Anytime we are with you, we feel at home, because we know your passion for business in the region, and we know the contribution that you have made to this region. And of course, the modeling that you have done, not only for the female gender, but also for businesses in this region, in this East Africa, and indeed across Africa. And therefore, we look upon you all the time to continue learning and to continue telling us what we need to do so that we change the way we do things, particularly in business. So thank you very much, Professor, for creating time to be with us. You have so many titles, and honestly, I will be doing a lot of injustice to mention only one. So allow me, because your name itself is a household. So thank you very much, Professor. Obviously, we have the second panelist, and that is Dr. Vimasha. Dr. Vimasha, the chairman of BIDIGO Africa. And you all know Vimasha and the contribution he has made. He's actually chair emeritus of the East African Business Council. We know his passion for doing things right. You know his passion for being mad, okay? You know his passion for feeling that it's important that we change the way we do things and we start doing things differently. Is, of course, impatience with those who are not very kind with time. So I think we have him. He is part of the reason, and together with BIDIGO Africa, why we have very tasty meals on our tables every single day, breakfast, lunch, and even dinner, because of course the products that BIDIGO Africa is making for this region. Thank you very much, Dr. Vimasha, Chairman, for being with us this afternoon. And karibu sana.
Thank you.
And, yeah, we have Kenneth Bagamuhunda, is a Director General, Custom and Trade at the EAC Secretariat. You all know that Kenneth is a friend of private sector in the region. I mean, anytime we need somebody at the EAC Secretariat, Bagamuhunda is always there with us. He works with the private sector, he works with the businesses in this region. Whenever there are issues, he's always there for us. And every time we call him to be with us and to participate in this kind of meetings and events, even in the past, Kenneth Bagamuhunda has been available and standing by any time to support the private sector in the region. Thank you very much, DG, for coming and joining us this afternoon. We have, I know he's there. Then we have our Madam Vice President, Madam Angie Konde, who is with us. Konde is the Vice President, Program and Development and Innovation at Alliance for Green Revolution in Africa, AGRA. And she has been, even in the past, interacted closely with the East African Business Council, with Musingi. And Musingi has also been very instrumental in supporting businesses that are, of course, starting at the country level and also in the region. And of course, our knowledge on even not only agribusiness, but businesses now, of course, businesses to be done. I think we are happy to have her on board as one of the panelists. Thank you very much, Madam Vice President, for creating your time to be with us. Karibu sana. Thank you. And then we have Mr. David Tarimo. David Tarimo is one of the leading tax experts, legal and tax experts in Africa. Currently, he's a country senior partner for Pricewaterhouse. You know Pricewaterhouse and what Pricewaterhouse means in terms of tax issues and business issues. And again, David Tarimo has been with us as a business council. I remember during our business summit, he was very much available and he spoke to us on a number of issues, particularly on tax. And now again, this afternoon is with us, created time to be with us. Thank you very much, Mr. David Tarimo, for joining us. David is with us. Yes.
Yes, I am.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. So now, ladies and gentlemen, we are starting this, and we all know that for the past number of years, the East African community has been obviously as a practice of having their budgets particularly done the same day. And this has been happening for the last, I think, a number of years. And the reason is, of course, in efforts to harmonize fiscal measures within the region. And of course, that's why the partner states agreed they should be having their budgets on the same day, of course, in the month of June. And we know that some of the partner states are not yet on board, and they're still trying to align their own fiscal years with the rest, Burundi and of course South Sudan. But the rest of the countries have been trying to make sure that they align and have their budgets ready the same day. So that as much as possible, we try to see how we could harmonize. And it's been pretty okay. And that is why last week, 11th of June, we had our budgets in the region partner states being read. And a number of things actually came out. It was a unique budget in the sense that it came at a time like this during COVID-19, with all the challenges that, of course, coming along with the pandemic. But of course, the theme again was quite constructive. The theme was how to stimulate the economies and, of course, safeguard livelihoods, jobs, businesses, and industrial recovery. And actually, that is now where the crux of the matters are. Yeah, trying to do a budget at a time like this, to try to tell us and convince everyone it's important that they do budgets that are going to safeguard livelihoods, jobs, and of course, businesses, and of course, industrial recovery. Aware that, of course, a number of businesses, I would say largely, most of the businesses have been adversely affected. And therefore, that is why these budgets were very unique. And therefore, that's why we want to understand from the experts this afternoon, how do we navigate? How do we get back into businesses? Because it's important. How do we make sure even during this difficult time, our businesses survive? Our business is going to survive. Are we going to survive this period, or are we going to, or do we collapse? And we cannot collapse. And that's why we are here to even support not only the big business, but also the small businesses. What is it that needs to be done? And therefore, we want to see whether these budgets that were read were alive to that, and whether they try to cover that. And therefore, I'll start away with David Tarimo, of course, country senior partner, Pricewaterhouse. Aware, and I'm sure you were the sender of these budgets, and therefore aware of the situation that we have in the region, with the debt ratios, the debts to GDP running to almost risky levels. And of course, combined with COVID, obviously. And of course, aware that you went through all the budgets for the countries that were read. The issue that came out, the initiatives that were addressed by the ministers of finance, how did these budgets, how are they likely to stimulate the economies back to what was foreseen before? Because what they were expecting to do was growth of at least above 6% in most of the partner states in the EAC. But now with the current situation, again, projecting to grow between 1.5 to about 3.5, all the economies. Now, and with all the debts that we have in this region, with the obvious COVID with us, is this budget, the budgets that were read, are they likely to address this? Are they likely to bring us back to where we were, or what we were projecting, back to above 6% growth? Of course, given the theme was stimulating the economy, safeguarding livelihoods, jobs, and businesses. Are we likely to get back to where we were, or we may have to adjust back to what we are? David Tarimo, what is your take on this?
Thank you for that.
Before you come in, I think it's only fair that I don't assume everyone knows me. My name is Peter Mathuki. Peter Mathuki, I'm the Executive Director of the East African Business Council. And that's why I'm pretty happy and to invite all of you into this webinar. Karibu sana, David.
Thank you. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we can pick you. We can hear you clearly, David. Okay. And I hope you picked my query.
Yes, I picked your query. I was just worried there was a slight echo. I think that, so your overall question is, I think in a nutshell, how quickly can we get back to where we were, and how realistic are the aspirations that have been set in these budgets? Maybe just as a starting point, on the growth figures, Kenya, I know, have revised down, and Tanzania, Kenya to 3% from 6.3 or 6.1, Tanzania to 5.5 to 6.9. And this seems to be the premise on which the budgets have been based for revenue collections. But if you look at World Bank projections, they come in at something like half of that. They're much more subdued, and sort of putting their numbers as the top side, so 1.5% for Kenya and 2.5% for Tanzania. Uganda seemed broadly in line with what's being projected by World Bank, but it's still a big decline on the previous year. So where is the drive for that growth seem to come from? I think fundamentally it's around two or three things. One, continued significant investment in infrastructure, particularly in Tanzania, and I can expand on that, but across the region, a lot of infrastructure investment. A number of measures to sort of inject liquidity, whether it's funding for micro, small and medium enterprises, funding for agriculture, particularly in Kenya.
Hello, EABC.
Money going into the
EABC.
Yeah, sorry, Kenneth Bagamunda, are you on board? I think David Tarimo is making his submissions. Kenneth Bagamunda, we introduce you. We are happy to know that you are on board now.
Are you online?
Yes, we are online. Kenneth, we can hear you. But is it David Tarimo who is submitting? Proceed, okay. David, sorry for that.
Sorry. So, as I was saying, infrastructure, micro, small and medium enterprises, then a big focus in terms of support for agriculture, various schemes in terms of loans and so on. You'll also see across the region that all the central banks have taken certain monetary policy measures, whether in terms of reserve ratios or making it easier to restructure loans for the banks. And again, that's really another measure to ease liquidity. I think a challenge that businesses across the region have seen has related to payments from government, whether it's subcontractors and delays in payments, but in particular VAT refunds. Now, in all the three countries, there were commitments to, make payments of significant amount of VAT refunds. But history tells me that that's still going to remain a challenge. And I think that's a particularly important point because when we look strategically at what we need to try and be achieving, we've had a disruption in terms of where we get our foreign exchange funds flowing from. We've got a huge dependence on tourism. In Tanzania's case, we're fortunate that that's offset to some degree because mining has come in, and with prices that's sort of helping offset part of that adverse impact. But the question is, how do we encourage more diversification of that foreign exchange earning base? And I suppose the challenge I would put is, unless we really seriously deal with that VAT refund issue, you're going to have a challenge encouraging people in the export business because they are permanently in a VAT refund situation. The other aspect I think that I would highlight is digitization. So there are a number of initiatives in terms of making the economy more digital, whether it's government operations, whether it's sort of initiatives to reduce charges in relation to digital payments. And then I think the last common theme would be that there's recognition that in this crisis, the consumer, his pocket is very tight. So you will have seen in Kenya and Tanzania significant reduction in tax on employees through increased tax bans, reduced tax rates, and at the same time, no increase in taxes on consumer goods. And I think that's just part of the reality, and trying to make sure that the consumer spend sort of seeks to maintain demand and therefore the opportunity for manufacturing. I think if I look at the three countries, I'd probably distinguish Uganda and Kenya from Tanzania. Whilst we've all been hard hit, Tanzania stayed open, whereas Kenya and Uganda have also had an internal lockdown. So it's not just been the external impact, but the internal impact. So, there are a number of measures, whether it's the Kenya Economic Stimulus Plan or Uganda's agricultural and job creation initiatives that really seek to catalyze a bit more, activity. So, in a nutshell, if you're asking, are the budgets realistic? I think the honest truth is, first of all, given the current scenario, it's very difficult predicting the future anyway. But when you look at the growth year on year and history in terms of what we budgeted and what we've achieved, I think there will be challenges, which comes back to your point around, debt service and interest payments, and particularly for Kenya, where it's become such a significant proportion of the bill. So, I think that can act as a real drag on growth ultimately. So, to be honest, I don't have a clear answer to your question, but what I am clear about is that all governments have erred on the optimistic side in terms of, their projections for the year ahead. I think lastly, just in terms of response to COVID, perhaps a bit more targeted activity or funding on the Kenya side. So that might be a bit more of a differential in Kenya if I compare to Tanzania, for example. So, there seem to be a number of initiatives, for example, to help the tourism sector financially. I think that's it. I don't know if I've responded to all of your questions, but that's my sort of very high level view.
Yeah. No, I understand, of course, that you feel governments were very optimistic when they were bringing out this budget that indeed this will be able now to take us back to what had been projected. And obviously now, and this is a quick question, then with all this, what is it that they should foresee or prepare to be the challenges when implementing these budgets? And what should they expect to address? What are these challenges that they should prepare, and what is it they need to do to overcome the challenges in implementing the budgets, the proposals in the budgets?
Yeah, so I suppose some of it is short term and some is more medium or long term. I mean, short term, it's around matching your cutting your cloth to fit. So, close management of government expenditure, which is an area that I have to say Tanzania has sort of excelled at in recent years, which perhaps has been more of a challenge for Kenya. I think when you look at all the budgets, they're all anticipating, further significant growth on debt funding, a lot of it foreign, and increasing proportion sort of non-concessional, which is fine if you're dealing with a crisis, but it ultimately may end up exacerbating the problem. But when I look to the medium term, I think it's around looking almost at COVID-19 as an opportunity, a chance to reset the clock. And what am I saying here? Maybe it can catalyze us to be even more energized around that regionalization agenda. It appears that the thinking globally will now go much more to closer supply chains. People will want to diversify where they source goods from, but we're in a much better position if we can go as a clearly unified group, to the market. I think the other is that COVID-19 has highlighted or just made people rethink around how we work with technology. And there is a question as to how well we use that opportunity, the extent to which our fiscal system assists or doesn't in terms of people's access to that technology. So, for example, telecommunication, electronic communication services, data, across the region, we have very high taxes. You've got the VAT, you've got the excise, and you normally have a number of other levies. And I understand it's a useful source of revenue for government, but has it perhaps gone too far to one side? Do we need to adjust, some of that to enable greater access? So, in a nutshell, I'm thinking around regionalization, manufacturing, technology, and just at a broader sense, that diversification of our forex flows, going forward. But there is if we don't quite make the top line we're expecting, I can't say that there is a magic, a magic bullet. So that's sort of my perspective.
Thank you very much, David. That is important. And I like the point that you're saying. COVID could be an opportunity for businesses to start rethinking, resetting, and trying to see how we may need to navigate going forward, particularly by the new environment, business environment that will be brought about by what is happening globally, but also the need for diversification, particularly on trying to see how do we diversify to ensure that we still have our forex flows in each of the partner states. And I think that is why we will be possibly coming back to you, and we'll come back to you later as we interact and get to know that particular time. Maybe is there anything that should have been done better by the governments besides what they did in these proposals? But we'll come back to you later. Let's go straight to Chairman Vimasha now. Chairman, you are part of the reason, and Bidco Africa is part of the reason we all enjoy our meals across Africa. And we are very happy, obviously, for that. And I can assure you, as you keep on smiling all the time, the way you do, we all keep on smiling as we enjoy the meals, prepared by Bidco Products. So Chairman, now we come to you, and from where you sit and with your experience in what is happening in East Africa and of course Africa, were the expectations of private sector met by these budgets? And which areas possibly would have required or may require improvement and may require contributions, particularly more engagement? This could be something that we would want to see between the private sector and the public sector. So you can tell us, were the expectations of private sector met by this? Welcome, Chairman.
Thank you, everyone, and good afternoon. Glad to see people from all over East Africa. So we are an East African company, and we're operating in all countries in East Africa, in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania. I think the key issue here is East African community and is East African community. Your question is, were the expectations of the private sector met? And when we look at expectations of private sector, I think budget is not going to be the address for all the private sector's needs. And I think budget is more of the government trying to balancing its act and show where they're going to spend in the next 1 year. But I think what we have this time is something unique. It's never happened before. It's unprecedented, and it's COVID, and it's this whole COVID pandemic, which is an opportunity, and it's a crisis. It is a major crisis, and I think this is a moment where if we were to look at it differently, I think these budgets have been prepared over the last 3-4 months, and people have been presenting various issues. But I would have seen that, we may need another budget soon in terms of not budget, but policy action soon to address the post-COVID situation. Every country's talked about stimulus packages, and I think we talk about a stimulus package in Kenya, in Uganda, in Tanzania. The question is, are these really stimulus packages, or are these packages to sort of heal the wounds of COVID-19? And I would just say that stimulus would mean stimulating the economy and making sure we actually revive a lot of the structures that are there. So if I was to candidly and speak truth to power, I think this is a moment that none of our heads of state, none of our governments should miss out. It's a point where we could actually make East African community what it is and what it should be. We did this 20 years ago in 2000, I think Sabasaba, 1st of July, we got the whole start of what East African community is in the new form. And 2005, which is 15 years ago, we had the customs union that was live. So 1st of January 2005, the customs union came into being, we got an ESC, CET, and all that happened. And it went full-fledged in 2010. So 2010, we had a full-fledged customs union operating activities. It's 10 years now, and I'm just saying it, 10 years forward, and even today as we speak, we haven't unified the whole of East Africa as one. And I think we should all have been seeing and talking from the same script and from the same book. And that is not happening. And that's something that I would say is a major failure of all of us. And I'm not saying one country, but all of us as East Africa could have used this. We spoke and we had envisioned a borderless East Africa with a CET that is going to protect us from the outside. It's a shell, and within ourselves, and as we've been adding countries, with 6 countries now, we should have actually had a borderless trade so that each country is now being able to say, I am supplying 160 million people from where I am, whether you're in Tanzania, whether in Uganda, whether in Rwanda, Kenya, wherever. And it becomes a real common market. I think this is another issue that, we got the common market put up in 2013, we went to monetary union, and it's still been ratified. But I think when we look at the situation, we have the land, we have the people, we have unemployment in a big way, but we have all the resources, we have the water, we have everything. So whatever we need, we have that. We also have demand. And I think this is important for us in East Africa to say the demand for products is there. The supply is available, we can make it available. So when we look at that, we still haven't achieved food self-sufficiency in East Africa as such. And this is something we could strive for and say, fine, each of the countries say, fine, within East Africa, we shall make ourselves food self-sufficient. We don't need to import from anywhere else in the world. And whether it's Kenya or Uganda or Tanzania importing or exporting to each other, that's not import-export, that's regional trade. And intra-regional trade really hasn't taken off. And I think still we become much more dependent on imported raw materials and imported products to really make a lot of the products that we make. So that's one thing that I would say our expectations haven't been met in the last 10 years or last 20 years for East Africa. It's not the budget that's going to be as symbolic. I think it's going to be the will. And I will address that situation to say, I might be controversial here, but private sector's needs are to say, allow free trade, freedom of movement, allow people to move, allow goods to move, and really make for the whole region. So if we look at that, our supply chains are still not local. We're still looking at various countries importing differently. And again, the whole tariff structure that was set up was degree of processing. What degree you process? There's raw material, there's intermediate, and there's finished products. When you look at that, there was a 0, 10, and 25 agreed to before. We are soon moving on, and I think 1st of July has been a date that's been set for the activation of the African ACFTA, the African Continental Free Trade Area. Now, if that's going to be happening, and I think it's crucial to see if that's going to be happening, we're going to have a different tariff structure. And going forward, are we going to be overtaken from Arusha to go to Ghana now and really articulate the same issues for another 10, 15 years on ACFTA? And I think this is where we need to look at that, number one. Number two, I think very simply, COVID should be taken as a crisis not to be wasted. We should take it as a seriously good crisis, a good thing for us to say, okay, where are we not? What do we need to do? Open up the borders. Allow no separate issues on any CET tariffs, and one CET set up on the basis of saying we want to have local production within East Africa. And I think this can be done. There's a whole global movement on these things. Yesterday, the economists even talked about it, that the people are now going to localize a lot of supply chains. Yes, we want to. The question is, we have the intent to, but we don't have the will there. And I think this is where I would say, don't waste this moment and say, let's go back and say, fine, what do we need to open up? If each country can provide the rest with all the products, why do we need to import at all? So I think that's one thing. Second thing is the consumer in East Africa, post-COVID, going forward. We have to exist with COVID. It's not going to go away. I think until the whole vaccine is found, all that stuff, we've still got 12 months or 18 months to go. We need to use this and say, what does this mean for East Africa? Can we now mutually trade with ourselves and make the environment very positive? I must say one thing. In this budget, if I compare all the budgets, I should say Uganda, well done. They've done a fantastic job of really improving the incentives to industry. And when I talk about manufacturing specifically, they've gone all out to make sure that manufacturers are absolutely protected. In fact, they've gone ahead even without CET. They've gone to 35% or 65% on many products and really looked at saying, let's increase more jobs there. So right now, if I look at it on a perspective of investable, I think Uganda looks like the most attractive place for an industry to go and put there and then sell to the whole region. So that's one thing. Second thing, I think the digital economy, I think David spoke about that. The digital economy is here to stay. We're having this meeting on digital right now. Now, every country is now saying we're going to charge a tax on this. And there's going to be different types of taxes coming onto this. So if we have to pay VAT for this discussion, for this 1 hour that we're going to have, or 2 hours we're going to have, how are we going to have the systems in place? I'm not against taxation. I think nothing wrong with that. But we're still in infancy as far as digitization is concerned. I would rather say let our youth, our women, everybody else be digitized totally, be enabled and empowered with such a system that they can actually transact, talk, and do it freely. But what has happened in our countries? We've got digital taxes coming on board. Lastly, I just want to say that there is no crystal ball, so we don't see where the future is. We've got a lot of uncertainty. They call it a VUCA world. Volatility, uncertainty, confusion, and a lot of anxiety. And I think that's going to prevail. But as that prevails, I think countries are going to see that whatever incomes they were projecting, whatever expenditure they were projecting, we will need to see, can we balance that so the expenditure does not exceed the incomes. And maybe the consumer has gone frugal. Consumer has learned to work from home. Consumer has learned not to spend on anything non-discretionary. So I think that's going to be quite crucial. A lot of governments, and I see that in Kenya specifically, they're still struggling with balancing last year's budget. And I think this is where they can't see the next 5 years or the next 10 years. So I would just say that we can use this crisis to change everything that we wish to for EAC. Otherwise, we'll be wishing it away. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Chairman. Obviously, we take your comments seriously, and on whether we want to shift from Arusha to Ghana and where the focus should be. I think we need to be more organized before we leave Arusha to Ghana, and possibly we may need to even prepare ourselves more. And I agree with you. Indeed, Africa is providing huge opportunities, and therefore, if we keep on now, the same March timing at the EAC, then we would definitely be caught up by the rest of Africa. We get the point. Obviously, the need to see COVID as an opportunity, and therefore the need to switch into the new order of doing things very important. But in your own submission, and of course, you have given credit to Ughanda's budget. We took note of Kenya's budget introduction of 1% tax on the annual turnover, of registered businesses. How is this likely to affect the industrial growth and competitiveness in the EAC region? Chairman.
I think if I was to look at it from an angle of 1% tax on annual turnover, it's actually another VAT. So added 1% on VAT so that everybody would be taxed that amount. So I don't think it is progressive at all. But having said that, a lot of startups, whatever revenue they have to give away 1%. A lot of the small businesses have to give away 1%, whether they make profit or not. So basically, what does it come to? It comes to another indirect taxes like VAT. So it is incremental, and I think the issue is, are we competitive? Vis-a-vis imports, vis-a-vis products coming from outside, are we competitive in our local
factory? The current situation is not possible, and therefore we have different steps of the production of that.
I think East Africa has.
Proceed, Chairman. Yes, proceed.
On PPEs, and local manufacturers have started doing it straight away. That was a need of the day. So if we take this and say, make it a crisis and say, fine, let's not import any of that stuff, we will see a huge move towards local acceptance, number one. People will start saying, I want to have this. So a lot of the regulations we have, a lot of the laws that we've gone in order to have, tariff barriers are coming down, but we're bringing in non-tariff barriers just to sort of block our own neighbors. I think they need to be done away with wholesale in one rapid space. So I think this is where we can have another 2 months and say, fine, let's look at a rapid recovery for the next 2 months, bring in new proposals and make EAC live, a borderless East Africa. We could do it as all the countries come together.
Thank you, Chairman. Of course, we'll be coming back to you. A number of questions. I can see a number of people trying to raise issues on wanting to get to know whether issues of local content and so forth were addressed, but we'll be coming back to you. Let me now go to Madam Agnes Konde, Vice President of AGRA. Madam Agnes, thank you again once more for coming. And we want to know, of course, yourself now from where you sit, and agriculture being the mainstay, the backbone of our economies in East Africa. And given that, of course, it has been, of course, disrupted also by the pandemic, do you think the budgets across the region addressed issues of food security, and whether what is it that you think they did to address the issues of recovery of the sector?
Thank you very much, Peter, and good afternoon, East Africans. Happy to see a couple of people that I know, including my my former boss, Dr. Maggie Kigozi. Well, I think the optics of agriculture being a priority across the region were clearly achieved, because if you look at all the budgets, they're really talking about safeguarding livelihoods, stimulating the economy, and they're all taking an agro-based approach and an SME-based approach to build competitiveness and equally speak to the East African community as a market that we need. I think people should mute if, I think there are a couple of people that are not muted. Yeah, so, look at the opportunity of the East African region as a market, which becomes an opportunity, because what we are really seeing with COVID, I think, is what we are terming at AGRA as the litmus test for the strength of an economy. And by a litmus test, we say, if you look at all the shocks that have happened to us, with COVID being, I think, at the peak of everything, we've seen really the fragility of our economy is totally exposed. And now everybody comes back and says, oh, we are going to come back to the agriculture sector and commit more. But while we are seeing significant increases in the budgets, double-digit growth year on year from last budget, if you actually weight the percentage contribution of ag budgets to the total budgets, it's less than 3%. Well, so what does that mean? From 2014, if you all remember the Malabo Declaration, we committed as states that we will be spending at least 10% of our national budgets into agriculture. I think if we started doing that from 2014, Africa would have had a better chance of bouncing back. So we are now seeing good initiatives of trying to put a bit more money here and there, but developing a sector takes a long-term approach, and it has got to be a consistent long-term approach. And what we are really seeing is that we are unable to absorb the shocks that we are seeing, whether it is floods, whether it is locusts, whether it's COVID, whether it is simple price fluctuations, whether it is, inter-border challenges of crossing borders with trade. We are unable to really absorb those shocks. So we really need to, like I think Vamal mentioned, to look at this opportunity, this crisis, and understand what are the volatilities that we have experienced over time, not just COVID, and begin to appreciate where we need to be to put stressors to the system that can help us navigate this complexity. So we are seeing quite a number of initiatives that are coming through. Uganda is talking about an agro-industrialization approach, is talking about digitizing, is talking about formalizing the informal sector. I don't know whether that is a good thing or a bad thing in essence, but ultimately what this means is that they are also putting taxes on, if you all know that our import bill across other countries is in billions of shillings. And so what we are trying to do is to actually tax those inputs. But what we are all forgetting is that the cost of that price will have to be borne by the consumer. And does the consumer actually have disposable income to actually spend more on these goods? So we really need to be talking about building inclusive competitiveness in these sectors, such that the consumer is spoiled for choice. And this choice needs to be good quality products at a good price and available as and when they need it. So agriculture continues to demonstrate that it is a sector that we must prioritize. As you all see from all the countries, we're spending an average of about 84% of our populations are employed in agriculture. If you look at the supply chain linkages, most of them have been broken. So the farmers have actually been growing crops, and we are going to see very good crops across Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. We're going to see very good crops. But the challenge we're going to experience in the next 2 months when we're harvesting is that access to markets is going to be constrained, because we don't see COVID going away in the next 2 months. So if COVID is still with us in the next 2 months, the farmers are going to lose most of that crop in post-harvest losses. So I see Uganda making a bit, of deliberate intentions on building storage capacity. Kenya is also investing in post-harvest loss technologies, equally with Tanzania. But these need to be linked to the SMEs. They need to be deliberately linked to SMEs so that the investments are where the harvests are going to happen, and then also linked to where the markets are going to be. So whether it's value addition, whether it is, all those have got to be deliberate. So what we're really seeing as AGRA is we're seeing disjointed activities, very good intentions, and I think we must give credit to the governments because the intention is really good. but the efforts are disjointed. And I'm happy that EABC is coming together and beginning to pull some of these pieces together. So if there's any one opportunity that we need to draw closer to the boardroom, is really the conversation on how to address the supply chain linkages so that we are not wasting any of the crop that the farmers are producing, but also support input suppliers to access the farmer and also ensure that the product is linked to the market. So that is a place where I think there's going to be great opportunity for the youth, for women, and for competitiveness to be built. So by the time we come out of this COVID, we should find a stronger supply chain system, a little bit stronger supply chain system, and that will give credence to ability to stimulate our economies back. Thank you.
Yeah. Well done. And I think thank you very much for submissions. And you've talked about market access. And possibly as a query to supplement your submission, do you think open skies in the region, taking advantage of now the open skies and trying to see how we could even convert our planes from being a passenger to maybe cargo, and see how, for example, we can see Air Tanzania take cargo from Dar es Salaam, go pick another one from Entebbe, pick from Nairobi, and take all the way to Asia. And so is Kenya, so is Rwanda here, so is Uganda here. Do you see this as an opportunity now to say, can we now open our skies and forget about these limitations so that we can have our products now access markets across the continent? Or what is your take on this?
I think obviously the opportunity to reduce the cost of transactions, the cost of doing business for any person as a manufacturer, I think Vimal Shah would speak to this even better than I would. The cost of distribution or linkages is probably 15 to 20% of the cost of doing business. So if you had open skies that would demystify the geographical borders that we have as a region, this would build competitiveness across the region, but also would make East Africa would build competitive advantage in East Africa across the rest of the regions. I think if there's any one region that has a better chance at building competitiveness, it's ESC vis-a-vis any of the other regions. But I think it is a political decision, and the economics out of it usually is a lighter bit. So I wouldn't want to comment on that. But if that conversation could actually happen, I think that would de-risk some of the things we're seeing for private sector players.
And thanks for that. Of course, political goodwill is important. But again, yes, we must make some of these decisions to access markets beyond our region. You spoke about, of course, Malabo Declaration, which is very important. And of course, based on the budgets that were read out, do you think that what is it that we need to do to ensure compliance? What is it that you can give our partner states, our countries, our governments, our stakeholders in this region to comply with this and of course, take advantage of it?
Well, I think we are very far away from achieving the Malabo Declaration, apart from a few countries, about 3 countries really. We're talking Rwanda, Ghana, and probably one other country that is a little closer to that. So I think the intent following the commitment is key, but I think we should hold ourselves accountable, and having a public-private sector dialogue where we hold ourselves accountable to the things we sign up to is important, and probably that's where the role of advocacy also comes in. But I think rather than procrastinate around what governments can do, because governments have limitations, they have a thin budget line, there is opportunity in enabling private sector to lead on this. So if there's a 7% gap on investable opportunities in the region, enable private sector to make that investment, because private sector will only come if it makes business sense. If it doesn't make business sense, no private sector actor will come into the ecosystem. And partners like AGRA are really here to de-risk that opportunity and make sure that private sector are coming and investing. So we're not crowding out private sector. We're ensuring that we are showing the opportunity and private sector is taking the lead and creating the sustainable jobs. So I think there is good reason to coordinate and create a partner, a willing alliance of private sector development partners and government to ensure that priority catalytic investments are supported and we unlock the gap that government won't be able to address in the medium term.
yeah, very important. And I think this tripartite approach of development partners, of course, the private sector and governments could be it, so that we can see attempt on whether we can, of course, achieve this. We'll be coming back to you to see how, in details, the issues of jobs, particularly for youth and women and so forth, were addressed by this. But as we, of course, get peak issues raised by participants here. But thanks a lot for this conversation. Let's now go to Kenneth Bagamuhunda. Kenneth Bagamuhunda, I hope now you're online and you can hear us.
I'm online.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much. Of course, I start by congratulating and thanking you that you've been available for private sector anytime we need you. And of course, we know you are a friend of private sector. We know you are very keen, and we kept on discussing with you on the EAC budgets, aware that even before the budget, we had submitted our views as East African Business Council, as private sector, to the EAC. And of course, a number of things that came into this, a number of stay of applications of the CET, Common External Tariff, and of course, countries' duty remissions. What are the implications of this that came out from the budget to the EAC integration? And how do we have these challenges addressed? The issue of stay of applications and, of course, duty remissions. And this came out almost in every budget that was read. What are the implications of this? What do we need to do? How do we need to do to address some of the challenges that are brought about by some of these stayaways and, of course, duty remissions? Bagamuhunda, please.
Thank you, Peter. First of all, application system and allowing needs has been evolving over time. Given that we have a lot of changes in the business environment and the trading environment, globally and even at the regional level. And therefore, these quick fixes that's been coming in form of states of Africa is an bigger need to have a comprehensive review of our tariff structure. When you look at the that came out this year, definitely they became a bit bigger because of the COVID pandemic, whereby partner states felt the need to retain what they had already asked for last year in some of the basic necessary changes that will be required to address the requisites for the COVID-19 pandemic. In that regard, you will find that most of the SOAs and the remissions point to a certain direction. And mostly the direction they are pointing to is cushioning the vulnerable sectors, and protecting the industry and manufacturing, and also boosting production. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can.
We can hear you. We can hear you. Proceed. We can hear you. We can hear you.
So if you see, of course, the SOAs are a discord themselves, but it is a discord within the same. The song is about trying to protect specific sectors and also enhance manufacturing and production in the region and vary. So we need to see how do we manage the discord through a harmonized approach. Definitely the stages of applications, they erode the fundamental foundation of the EAC custom by having variances in our tariffs at the national level. And this has a recipe of completely distorting the trade balance within the region. First of all, they impede intra-trade because the countries that enjoy specific SOAs and remission may not be able to access the market on a preferential level. That is one of the disadvantages of these specific remissions and SOAs. Secondly, they hamper competitiveness because some of the beneficiaries of those SOAs are at a better advantage, on an advantage compared to the other players within the same market. And therefore they have that distortionary effect. But when you look, generally the COVID-19 has created also a fertile ground for these SOAs and country-specific remissions because of lackized, which we are still undertaking through the comprehensive review of taxes. But what is coming out very clearly now, and I hope we are going to grab this as an opportunity, is that the issue that is hampering the comprehensive review of the tax, which is the maximum rate above 25%, is there is now some commonality on what actually each country, the countries want the level of protection to be. And I think this we should, as soon as possible, take this as an advantage, as a stepping stone to get the task force together again, so that we can move from what the ministers of finance have agreed on. During the pre-budget meeting, it was felt that we are going in a wrong direction by encouraging these stays of application. And the ministers had concern about it because we are slowly dismantling our tariff. And definitely there are even schools of thought which think that it doesn't have a legal founding. The SOAs don't have a firm legal founding within our instrument. So it is now that we need now to relook into our comprehensive review of the tariff and get back onto a common external tariff, but ensure that we have inbuilt mechanisms to address short-term interventions that may occur in some sectors, in some economies, so that we can be able to keep the pace and have our customs union and the common market moving as planned from inception. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you very much, Bagumunda. That is very true. And you heard Chairman Vimasha say that now businesses are thinking of shifting from Arusha to Accra. And therefore now, maybe because you've been into it for the last long time, 20 years or so, and we still been talking of the same things, CET that has taken now over 5 years. Now we are talking of harmonization of domestic taxes. Some countries are operating at 14%, others are still operating at 18%. And of course, with what you have said, what are these? Are we really going to get a point where we shall say we have achieved this harmonization of fiscal policies at the region towards a monetary union? If at all we cannot, how do we get into this?
Peter, the harmonization program of particularly the domestic taxes, leave alone the international taxes, the customs taxes, which were harmonized through the CET and the elimination of internal tariffs. That one was achieved, but although now we are going backwards as far as the CET is concerned. But on the domestic tax front, I think it is as old. That program is as old as EAS itself. Actually, it started before even the customs union came into being. But and this is a realization that the need for fiscal harmonization is a critical foundation for the subsequent stages of integration. You are not going to have a well-functioning customs union, a well-functioning common market, a well-functioning monetary union without fiscal policy harmonization. And one of the elements of fiscal policy harmonization is the domestic tax laws, the domestic tax regimes. This domestic tax, which is as old as EAC, as I had said, from the outset, so that importance to have that. However, this has been impeded by some factors. One, the first factor is that there has been a tendency to over-rely on external support, which has, in some instances, deaccelerated the pace. You know, at one time we had already even finalized the draft for harmonization of excise duty. We were going on to the VAT, and we were moving to income tax. But because of some advice that is brought by partner states in regard to tax harmonization, we had to move backwards and start now developing a policy. Now, fortunately, the policy has been finalized, and some instruments are going to be developed along the same lines we had started on. The second aspect that has created a disadvantage or a hindrance to the domestic tax harmonization is the minimal involvement of the private sector. The enthusiasm with which private sector participated in the customs union has not been witnessed in the domestic tax harmonization. You know, we rely also on the private sector in collaborate with us in pushing some of these programs at the regional level. So I think there is need for the private sector to get on top of things, and we look at it. Definitely the partner states are hesitant to have tax harmonization because of the tax policy space they are looking for. You can imagine these tax changes that have taken place during this COVID pandemic. If you had, if they were at the regional level, they see that it would be a little bit difficult to make sudden and quick changes. So they would rather remain it at a sovereign, in a sovereign manner for purposes of making the adjustments in order to address these shocks that come in from time to time. Because fiscal policy interventions are part of the interventions that are used to stabilize the economy. So CSE has been there. We have harmonization of internal taxes. We had one excise tax law. We had one income tax law. Before, in the defunct East African community, we had one sales tax law. So it shouldn't be at the framework of the existing tax laws in the partner state. They are basically the same. The differences are very minor in exemptions, in the tax rate, like the VAT one at 16 and at 18. Kenya, I think, has moved lower now, and some few variances. I think it is very critical now that we look at the domestic tax harmonization and accelerate the program. Since we have finalized the tax policy, now it is important to have the operational instruments put in place for purposes of having a domestic tax regime. We may still ensure that there is flexibility in those laws so that the tax rates and the tax exemption regime can vary, but within a harmonized. So I think it is critical that that will be done. And I would urge the private sector to join hands through their national governments, through the EAC, through the EABC, push for the domestic tax harmonization program.
Yeah. and you see, Ken, before you leave, we ask you sorry, can you get us, Ken?
Yeah, I'm getting you.
Yeah. Thank you for your submissions. And what I'm asking is, every time we've been talking about buy East Africa, build East Africa, and that has been our mantra as long as this, and you know very well. But these budgets that were read, did they anyway promote this mantra in terms of promoting regional value chains? And of course, the EAC strategy on industrialization. Are they in any way, promoting that agenda?
I think if you start from the EAC industrialization strategy, you find that it is compatible with what is taking place in as far as the drive for industrialization in East Africa is concerned. And generally, all partner states have prioritized industrialization as one of the areas quickly put in place for purposes of achieving self-reliance. Definitely the value chain is a very critical aspect of the industrialization strategy. If you look through the strategy that we have, the EAC strategy, but the initiatives being done at the regional level, one mistake that I always see is that there is a tendency to believe that the tariff policy will be able to achieve all. No, tariff alone may not stimulate value chain development and production. It needs a policy mix, create a conducive environment for value chain development and production. So, of course, divergent tariffs have negatively impact on the region. But when you look at this budget, if you come back to it, you see that countries are trying to look at the critical areas. You'll find that, but in a rather not harmonized manner. You'll find that I'll be releasing the Gazette, I think, in the course of this week, in the course of next week. You'll find that the Rwanda, Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania are all interested in promoting, for example, the textile sector. And there are a number of items that have been listed for giving a waiver on taxes, on import taxes, promote that. And it is good that they are doing it. But what we need to do is, from the regional perspective, we need to identify which are the critical regional value chains. Because what the countries came in with are national value chains. And the national value chains may not be the same as the regional value chain. Of course, if you aggregate them, they become regional. But we need to see the link between the producers in different parts of the region and how they are interlinked, so that we create a policy framework that will enhance. If you are looking at cotton, you look at the cotton producing areas, you look at the ones who do the lint, you look at the ones who do the cloth, you look at the ones who do the garments. Where are they based, and how do we facilitate them? And how do we enhance their ease of doing business across, so that they can feed their production lines? So we still have some disconnects and missing links. But when you look generally at the budget framework that has come out, it is really focusing on some production area. Of course, the COVID-19 has been an eye-opener in some respects. But I think we should also be cautious on where we are going to focus most. Of course, like now, if we are focusing on producing sanitizers, what happens if there is a vaccine and a treatment, and therefore the need for using sanitizers may not be, the demand may not be as much as it is now. What will are those production lines flexible enough to turn into producing other items? If we are talking about masks, how can we make our industry become so that it responds to the needs as they change from time to time? So I think much as there is this rush, we need also to sit on the drawing board and look at what is the future recovery program for the whole of East Africa, particularly as far as production and manufacturing and value chain are concerned, and trade, definitely, which is the linking tool for all this that is produced in the region. So, Peter, what I can say is that value chains, yes, it is a priority, but we need to do more, and we need to work together with the private sector, in particularly identifying and mapping out the critical value center and facilitate them with production centers that will be able to attract the establishment of critical value chain players across the region. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, I think, positive approach. Yeah, I think that has come out well. We'll be coming back to you as we interact with those who are participating. And now we go to Professor Maggie. And you know, in business, and I wanted to tell us now, was there a deal for SMEs? Now, in the midst of this COVID and the challenges that are coming along, will SMEs survive this pandemic? And did the budgets of the partner states address this particular challenge of how to make sure that SMEs survive post-COVID? And what is it that you think that came out clearly from all the budgets that you think, yes, these are budgets that were pro SMEs? Because that seems to be obviously what is at stake. Professor, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Peter. Can you hear me?
Hear you clearly, very clearly. We can hear you clearly, Prof.
Thank you. And condolences on our Ambassador Hilo, please. Oh my God. He was the life of EABC. It is so sad. We shall miss him.
Yes. Take it. Thank you.
Yes, our leaders did read out their budget all on the same day. But what do they know about the future is my question. Is Corona going to be like Wuhan? Can we handle the Wuhan solution? Is it going to be like the US? Or is it going to be like Iceland where, and so far, I think for our region, so good. It seems to be less virulent. Our people don't get so sick. So we can hope and pray, but really we know, like I think Vimal said, that this is just the beginning. The disease is with us and it's going to be with us for a while. So even as they predicted the future, I was just thinking, do they really know what the future is going to be? And right now, what has COVID done to the SMEs? It is really a disaster. Businesses are closing. People are losing jobs. The lockdown transport. So even if you wanted to continue, you couldn't. Education, which is a big private sector, SME sector, right from nursery school to universities, are all closed. Health facilities, again in Uganda, but at least 50% is provided by the private sector. So that's where we are as SMEs. Okay, agriculture, which is where I belong, was very bad for the first 2 weeks of lockdown. Before solutions had been found, I sell eggs. I had no market. The eggs go to Kenya, so the border's closed. The local market, there's no one on the street, there's no one in the shops. So that was a big problem. I also have coffee, which is better. You just dry it and store it. But remember, our SMEs, I mean, our people in the village are looking for food to eat today. For them, storing is not an option. They need their money like yesterday. So that's where we are as SMEs following this COVID. But for Uganda, and I think some of you, it wasn't just COVID. We had strong rains, terrible rains. We have floods. All our beach properties, and we have lots of beach hotels and buildings, and really so many businesses along the beaches. So those ones have been affected very negatively, as has fishing. Rivers have broken their banks. Whole towns have flooded and disappeared. We also had locusts. So I don't know what we did, but we seem to be getting a lot of punishment. But as a farmer, it was a good season. The rains were fantastic. Vimal, did you have that? Would you appreciate that as palm oil? Maybe a little too much? You did, yes. I did for coffee, I did for matoke, but look at the beans, look at the maize. They didn't dry. So that was another problem. The rains were too much. The transport, of course, we have no way.
Can we have the camera on your face? Yeah.
The camera's on my... Okay.
We can see your face.
Okay, but maybe you have a better face that Peter has put up, so I can close my camera, I think. Okay, and that one won't change. Yes, so I was talking about the transport. Sales, all the outlets were closed, the markets, the hotels. Export was not possible, neither was import for a while. So are we expecting new foreign direct investment? I think that may not happen. Yes, domestic investment is going to happen. It is already happening. Ugandans and the East Africans are seeing opportunities that maybe they didn't exist before. So our new norm is to look at the different new opportunities. And we can do that. We are looking at, yes, we as Uganda can feed you all. We have an opportunity now to grow food and feed our region. And Ugandans have never been short of food, but now we can take on the region as well. The issue of ICT, information communication technology. First of all, the fact that it is where it is has really helped us. We have mobile money, we have e-banking, we have e-taxes, we have, we are very lucky that we had moved it that far, that it is saving us right now. We have Zoom meetings in the region and globally because we have the infrastructure, the ICT infrastructure. Now, the young people are coming up with the business opportunities in the sector. And I see some very exciting things taking place. When it comes to health, again, we have seen the opportunities. You've talked about protection equipment, masks and others, and even drugs. We have the drug companies, the pharmaceuticals, ready to take up what was normally imported. We have funding, the new budget that has come in with, funding through the Uganda Development Bank and also through the region, lots of funding prospects, and especially for value addition. When I spoke about my eggs, it was a problem, but we do have an investor who dries eggs and makes an egg powder that is used for baking. So there you are. That is the way forward for the future. Let's value add. Same as the coffee, why are we exporting the whole amount? We could be adding value locally. We have recognized that one business is not safe. You must diversify. You must do more than one thing. Otherwise, we were in trouble. People in hotels were finished. They, if they can't diversify and pick up something else very quickly, we are in problems. I was happy in the budget about the skills training to make this happen. For us to diversify, we need the workforce. So there's a lot of investment in skills. The finance is there in the development bank. SACCOs are being encouraged. Domestic debt payment. I don't know if that is still a dream. They've said they're going to pay the domestic debt, and that will put money, liquidity into the system, which will be very good. And last but not least, looking at agriculture, and Aggie, hi, I'm glad to know you are with AGRA. Looking at agriculture, the mindset change in the Ugandan elite is fantastic. We've gone back to agriculture. These are the lawyers, these are the doctors, with a little bit of savings, because as Vimal would tell you, agriculture is actually not cheap. You need capital to start a business. So the elite are going back. And when you have a big farmer, you have the outgrowers benefit from linkages. So agriculture and value addition as well. These elite will be able to afford value addition, which our traditional smallholder farmer, of course, could not do. I therefore believe that the investment which we heard about again, and we have seen happening in the industrial parks, if you're going to add value, you don't need to struggle like all investors do with bona fide occupants, what we call them, and squatters. And there's always this tug of war about land ownership. But if there's an industrial park and an investor can just get his piece of land, I was happy to be able to give Vimal a very nice piece of land in the Ginger Industrial Park. He will confirm that. It made life, yeah, true?
Very true.
True. Yeah, excellent. So that's what investors need right now. If they're going to add value, if we are going to industrialize, we need serviced industrial parks. And this was budgeted, so I'm happy about that. So the challenges with the budget. Do I see picking of winners? It looks like we are blocking some, encouraging others, and yet this is a free economy where we want the private sector to lead. We want them to compete fairly against one another. I was a little concerned when you over prioritize your sectors. I mean, some sectors you don't even dream about, and the private sector comes and does something fantastic. So for us to be picking winners, stopping some people, I know COVID is a difficult one, but right now in Uganda, there's something called an arcade and something called a mall. And we are saying the mall can work, the arcade cannot work. That again is picking winners and is preventing the people in the arcade from competing. I have a restaurant in an arcade. You have a restaurant you are working, I cannot work. So the request to government, let's have SOPs, standard operating procedures that we need to maintain, we need to achieve, but allow people to continue to run their business. I think I'll stop there, Peter. That was a bit about agriculture and how I feel the budget was made. I think it's a good budget. A lot has been achieved in it. Thank you.
Thank you. And I totally picked that is a good budget, and we need now to focus on value addition. Industrialization seems to be the way. Of course, again, mindset and to adjust ourselves into the new way. Prof, what is it that now we need to do? What are the quick fixes for the survival of SMEs? What is that we need to do now, like governments need to do in the partner states, like almost immediately to fix, survival of SMEs post-COVID? Assuming now we may, overcome COVID maybe the next few months, no one knows. What do you need to do to fix SMEs? What are the quick fixes?
Yes, the quick fixes would include, the financing that they are looking at actually achieving. I hope that happens. It may not happen for everyone. It's going to happen for registered companies. And yet we all know a very large percentage of our farmers and our SMEs are actually not registered. But then working through the model of SACCOs, I don't know if you all call them SACCOs, but in Uganda I call them maybe SACCOs, could be cooperatives, getting people together to raise money together and be able to support one another in the businesses. So that's access to finance is a big one. Access to markets is even bigger right now. We have goods, they have goods. I have a car, I have a truck to take whatever I want to take. The smallholder does not. So his goods are stuck somewhere up country, waiting to be taken to the markets. If they are tomatoes, he's finished. If they are coffee, if it's coffee, it might wait a little bit. Getting the transport logistics working again is critical. And what does that take? The disease is still with us. We don't doubt that. We have seen what truck drivers are doing to the figures in Uganda, but it can be managed. And I think right now it is being managed. The disease is being controlled. So let's get transport functioning. I don't know how people can sit on a border and be safe. I'm sure there are possibilities. Somebody's got to come up with the technology so that I'm not breathing in what the border driver is breathing in, because many Ugandans, that's their mode of transport to get to work, to their businesses. So, and also to take their goods, the trucks need to come back on the road to be able to take people's goods. The industrial areas, we need the skilling that is being offered. We see it working already. I see great SMEs all over the country in fashion, in hair, in welding, in carpentry. Really, the Skilling in Uganda project is actually working very well. But these are the people most affected today. How do we get them up and running again? Yes, I know you're asking me for the answer, but I'm sending the question back to you. It's going to be challenging. We are going to depend on the fighting spirit, on the entrepreneurial spirit that our people have. They are going to come back and fight. That is all that I can contribute at this time.
Thank you very much. The fighting spirit, it is necessary at a time like this, no doubt about it. And, participants, you can hear definitely the choice of our panelists, and in terms of the content that is coming out from each one of them. And I can see you've, of course, raised a number of, questions that you would want them addressed by each one of them. And possibly I would want to start by interacting with Tarimo once more. David, what is coming out from the participants are asking you, as the regional governments, of course, they have postured sort of to willingness or to have given what they are calling, quotes unquote, stimulus packages aspects. Do you foresee now these governments now activating austerity measures in probably in a year or two? And what is it that you would recommend to be the elements of this austerity in a manner that they are not put to again affect adversely the economies, but rather to support the growth of our businesses in the region? What are these austerity elements that can be expected, because that is what is like governments are likely to do? And what would be the impact again of this austerities? What is it that government should touch, and what is it that they should not touch when you come to austerity measures? David.
Yeah, so it's not a very easy question to respond to. I mean, at the end of the day, when you have government revenues falling short, you will tend to see a slowdown in government expenditure. Let me put my camera on actually, just for Vimal. See if this works.
Yeah, very important. Yeah.
And I think what we've tended to, okay, we've not come across this kind of situation, this dramatic before, but what you've tended to see is where revenue falls short, then the cuts are made to the development expenditure allocation. So, you know, that's what happens. And that's what I said, you have to cut your cloth to fit. If I was going to be a skeptic, and it's not just to do with governments here, it's probably a concern in the developed economies where they are pumping money in. The question always comes as to what does that mean for inflation? You know, where do our currencies go? So do governments resolve their problems by, you know, in an artificial way by some kind of devaluation stroke inflation? But there is no, there's no easy answer. There's no panacea. And that's why I said before, I think the focus has really got to be around the medium to long term. And what I find interesting actually is if you look at the growth for East Africa, you know, we're praised the fast, I think ADB said we're the fastest growing region in Africa in 2019, 5 or 5.5%. And yet, if you look at the FDI in the last 4 or 5 years, it actually seems to have declined compared to the 5 years before. And it's a completely different picture in somewhere like Ethiopia. So the question is, I think, how do we rebalance the funding? We can't continue with the debt, but then what do we need to attract the foreign direct investment, you know, back in the quantities it was in before? And I think there's a need for dialogue. There's a need for better understanding of what, you know, what investors need, the sort of stability, you know, and just the economics. So, for example, Tanzania's, you know, can be very happy that we've got this buffer that's created by the benefit of the gold now. But it's all coming from, well, not all, but the majority of it from 2 mines that came into production 20 years ago on the back of reforms made then. And the question is, you know, why are there no more mines? I could ask the same question with, you know, the protracted delay with the oil in Uganda and so on. So I think there needs to be some honest conversations as to what is it that has held back the FDI. I think we need to think around SMEs. What can we do to make tax regimes simpler for them? And then just leading on to the earlier discussion around, I think there was talk around open skies. We've talked a little bit about technology, digitization. I think we need to rethink that whole area of taxation of services. It's better understood for goods, but not so well for services. And I think it's quite an important point, especially in the context of the African continental free trade area, because I don't know, if I look at it geographically, certainly sitting in Tanzania with EAC and SADC, in terms of places I can physically get goods to, that's probably enough. But if I'm talking about Ghana or Nigeria, it may be other things such as services, tourism, entertainment, software, even the way we communicate, the costs on telecoms. Let's see how we can, you know, how we can harmonize that. And then I think last but not least is just, yeah, consultation with taxpayers and investors will lead to better policy formulation. So I don't think I've really answered the question because there is no easy short-term answer, but I think we need to make the right policy decisions for the long term, which will catalyze investment and with that jobs, you know, exports and so on.
Maybe before I let you go, David, and you see, this is what participants are asking you. of course, with the uncertainty that is being brought by this pandemic, should governments have given the macro variables in terms of REGIS instead of the finite figures? And should they be considering or stimulating scenarios that, or bringing in scenarios that would prepare this future that is uncertain?
I would like to believe that they probably have done their own scenarios for those possibilities, but they may not be articulated publicly necessarily. So, I mean, it may be seen as causing undue alarm. And I suppose the challenge is there's so much is uncertain. Maybe you just create more uncertainty by referring to, variables, and people may even question those variables. But certainly there needs to be planning, at least behind the scenes, in what if scenarios, a bit like businesses, do various aspects of business continuity planning. And I'm sure the governments are doing some exercises looking at that.
Okay, thanks. Thank you very much for that. I think that is well captured. And now I go to Angela, Vice President. Please tell us, you've talked about of course, now we've been talking about the small scale farmers, and how do they now even unlock what we are seeing as some stimulus that is coming about from governments? How do these small scale farmers unlock the potential of the stimulus packages, and of course the funds that are being allocated for them? How do they do that? And of course, even sourcing funds, and also again inputs for their survival, and of course to maximize their production. And how are they supposed even to be reaching out to our development partners? Because we know a number of partners who are in this. How do even the small scale farmers get into that space? Angie, is Angie with us? Okay, she's obviously may not be with us at this. I don't know whether if she can unmute. If Angie, you can unmute. Okay, as we wait for Anchi now, we could go to Dr. Vimasha. The issue of now coming back to you on the issue of local content as a way of stimulating our economies. And do you think how do we now take advantage? How do we now start picking up the issue of local content to become stimulants for our economies in the region? What is it that needs to be done? What do governments need to do to promote now the issue of the aspects of local content is a way of stimulating our economies going forward?
I think thanks a lot, Peter. When we look at local content, I think in East Africa or within East Africa, the 6 countries we talk about, we have enough potential for a lot of things. So if we added value to that and say, fine, each country, right now what we're doing is we're taking Kenya, then we're taking Uganda, then Tanzania, and then Rwanda, and looking at what do they have, and they're adding value in their countries. And we're not yet thinking as East Africa. One cap and say, borderless East Africa, let's look at all the resources we've got. How much land do we have? What sort of commercial agriculture can we do? What sort of small-scale agriculture can we do? And where does the produce go? At the end, there's an offtake contract. Because in a demand-supply situation, you have a customer at the end, who's your consumer. The demand is still there. And you've got a supplier. And then say, fine, let's supply this from here. So if south of Tanzania can now bring in a lot of wheat and supply the entire region, we would stop imports. Uganda, I think a lot of Ugandan land can be used for planting maize, and white maize we can, flood the whole of East Africa from there. So milk from Uganda is much more cheaper. Let's flood the whole East Africa with that and allow free movement and then go for full value chains across the board. I think that's going to be important. Second thing is, we started off EAC with a view to have access to a larger market. Kenya alone, Uganda alone, Tanzania alone are not going to, or Rwanda alone, or Burundi alone, or South Sudan alone are not going to be large enough markets for producing. And I think this is where we said 160 million people, one common market, let's produce for the region and sell to the region becomes more attractive. So we need to look at that and say, fine, local value addition. I think a step in the right direction would be review. I think what Ken Bagamonda said very clearly, let's review the entire CET and say, fine, whatever is local content, let's make sure we give it that protection. But it's not about protection. I think it's more about competitiveness and competitiveness of each one to be looked at from where they are. Otherwise, we're still defending against each other and we need to be thinking as one. So apart from this is just manufacturing of goods and agri-produce. What about services? We've got a lot of potential in the youth and the service area. We could do services from each region. So I think this is where we just need to say, let's think first as East Africa, clearly put down the political will now. And it's renew after COVID and say the political will is there to become one as East Africa. If we don't, we will look at ACFTA. Rather than that, do it now and make that happen. So I think then we can unleash the private sector, the public sector, and we create something called the PPPP, People, Public, Private Partnership, whereby we actually say, let's make East Africa the region for the world. And actually, from East Africa, we can then supply the whole of ACFTA with a lot of produce. So first, we need to move to self-sufficiency on local value added. There could be a lot of products that are being made here. I think cashew nuts in Tanzania, avocados, there are very many products that could be made here, and we could then supply the whole region, or supply Europe, supply America. Why not become the breadbasket? So I think it's the will, first of all. Now, a lot of these countries are struggling to handle their budgets. And I think when you look at it from the angle of Western countries, today with the post-COVID situation, a lot of the post-COVID situation will be they don't have donor money. They don't have enough money to give out for handouts as they were being given before. So private sector needs to come to private sector. And there's a lot of private sector capital sitting out there looking and saying, where do we invest? We need to make some very bankable projects in East Africa, make them happen and say, let's do it. Whether it's small scale, medium scale, large scale, whatever it may be. But it's actually to make sure we become self-sufficient. Number two, local value added. We could do so much more local value added here. Now, there's a big move across a lot of countries that I see anti-China. And they're all moving saying, look, let's stop using Chinese products, let's stop doing that. Take benefit of that, let's do local value addition here. There are so many industries we haven't even begun here yet, which we could start doing. So I think there's a lot of that. First thing, get the political will and say, let's do it. I'll give you a simple example. You were talking to Angie about free airways. If our airways were free right now, imagine all the border posts in Uganda and Tanzania where we're stuck for 14 days, 24 days at the border. You could have planes. The planes are lying idle in Kenya, in Uganda, in Tanzania, sitting there doing nothing. Supply the whole, all the product with it by air. You can have air traffic going to and fro. Within hours, your produce will be in Uganda, in Tanzania, in Rwanda. And from Uganda, you'll have the produce in Kenya or in Mombasa within hours. And that plane is lying idle. The people are sitting there. There's a lot we could do right now in the COVID moment. So I just think that we need to think differently. We need to act fast. We need to bring down the egos. And I think the last thing we need to say is, let's remove the egos of each country and say, let's have the ego of East Africa built up louder. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Chairman. Indeed, do away with our egos, and that is what seems to have been taking us. And also, of course, the aspect of acting very fast. In fact, someone is asking you, now that you're here, Chairman Vimasha, as we approach now ACFTA, now the Africa Continental, should we approach it now as partner states, or should we approach joining ACFTA as regional economic blocs? Which would make more sense? Should we reorganizing ourselves as East Africa and start negotiating with the rest of the continent as East Africa, or we should go to the table and start discussing or negotiating as Kenya, as Tanzania, as Rwanda, as Burundi, as South Sudan? Someone wants to learn from you. What is your take? Chairman.
I think we've got East Africa already covered. There's no problem there. I think every country's taken their own steps. It's already. I think somebody needs to unmute. You mute yourself, Peter. I think it'll work. If we look at it from that angle, today everybody's already gone ahead. Kenya has already gone ahead. I think Uganda has already gone ahead. Rwanda has gone ahead because that's the headquarters. And those three countries have already gone ahead. It's not about going back and saying, let's renegotiate. It's already fait accompli. So everybody else just comes and let's join together. But we must make sure we harmonize East Africa first to say East Africa now thinks as one. East Africa does things as one. And therefore, we're not overtaken by ACFTA. Otherwise, believe you me, when I said that we will now move from discussing in Arusha to discussing in Ghana, because Ghana is the headquarters, it's not about exporting to Ghana, but it's about the discussions will be happening over there. And that's important to say, we don't want to be overtaken by that. But we've agreed to disagree till now. We've agreed to say, let's part ways or whatever. And I think that needs to stop. It is a moment in COVID and say, because of COVID, blame it on COVID and say, because of COVID, we've got to come together, make this thing happen. I think it's very simple. So ACFTA is coming whether we like it or not. It's the whole of Africa coming together. There's no option there. It's coming. 3 countries have already ratified. The rest will ratify. It will happen. And I think overall, we've got no choice but to say, let's make sure within ourselves we become much more united and robust.
Thank you very much, Chairman, for that submission. Indeed, I can see still they're sending more questions, but as I come back to you, they are asking Kenai Bagamuhunda. Of course, we've listened to the budget and we've listened to what panelists are submitting in this, and there's a lot still needs to be done by governments, by private sector. But from where you sit at the Secretariat of EAC, what is it that you think governments need to do better to improve business environment in the region?
Thank you, Peter. I think what this pandemic has unleashed or taught us is the issue of consolidating our integration. Not only is integration needed from the economic front, but also integration of social sectors, social programs, because the challenge of health across borders has really shown that we need to get together more. And I think what governments need to do is to invest more in the integration process and also plan together for purposes of having a regional approach on some of the fundamental sectors and interventions that are to be done in order to have our recovery program moving at the same speed. Of course, there has been a lot of disruption in the manufacturing sector, in the trade sector, the tourism is completely down, the hospitality industry is on its knees, schools education is now on a standstill. We as a region now to come together and plan and create that policy framework that enables further consolidation and integration of those the sectors so that they can create the conducive environment for free flow of trade, free flow of people, free flow of investment, free flow of innovations and technology. We need to look at what we can produce as East Africa and sell at the continental level. Of course, we are going to the continental level as East Africa, but definitely as Vimasha has, we need to put our house in order for us to move to one position and market ourselves as East Africa. Otherwise, if we go there as separate partner states, then we will be overwhelmed by the big powers within the continent on how they will manage to sway the whole trade framework into for their advantage when we don't move together. So I think The integration process should be reinforced with more commitment, with more coordination, with more planning, and definitely with that, then we should be able to see what countries can do at that level using the principle of subsidiarity. What countries, what partner states are best at doing at the national level, and what should be done, prioritized at the regional level. And with that, then we should be able to create the conducive environment. Definitely, Peter, you know, the African Development Bank recently released its 2019 Integration Index, and East Africa came on as the most integrating region in the continent, and doing particularly well in the movement of people, on the integration of financial sector, and also unexpected trade. But still we have challenges. You have seen how COVID has disrupted movement of goods across borders. Not that because we don't have enabling instruments in place, not that we don't have policy framework in place, but because of the new wave of change, because the front line now decision making at the border is the health. And health may not understand how trade flows. So there is need to get a linkage. There is a need for strengthening relationship between various sectors in the economy, the social sectors, the productive sectors, and the trade, so that they sing the same song, they move together, so that these disruptions we have seen should be a learning point in order to work at in this regional integration agenda. Thank you.
Yeah, and actually, Ken, what they're actually asking you, you've seen what has been happening at the borders. And that is actually what is worrying some participants, saying we would have done better if there was a coordinated approach into how to handle some of these crises. And now, given what we have learned from COVID-19 as a pandemic, how prepared are we for even bigger, for example, bigger pandemics in future, if we cannot have a very coordinated approach in dealing with the pandemics? How prepared are we as a community, and what is it that needs to be done going forward?
I think, Peter, this pandemic has really taught us a big lesson. It is an eye-opener. I have been at the borders. I've been moving to the borders. I've been to Maraba, I've been to Busia, I've been to Mutukula, I've been to Chikagati. I was recently at Katuna, which is completely closed. Nothing moves, not even a soul. So I think it is an eye opener that we need to draw out now a new normal for working as East Africa, all sectors moving together, so that politicians, technicians, and policymakers do not go in discord. There is a disconnect. Today, one politician closes the border, another one opens it partially. And I think that is the kind of having uncoordinated approaches in terms of how to go about these things. So I think preparing for the future is a very critical thing, and that's why we are already working on a recovery plan, which I think we should bring on board the private sector to also make input, so that part of it is on new mechanisms for facilitating trade and movement of people. People are talking about open skies, open borders. We need also to review whether our borders are structurally and infrastructurally sufficient to handle some of these pandemics. Fortunately, we had built these OSBPs. If they were not there, I think there would be more chaos. But because at least there is some infrastructure in place, it has helped to an extent in easing the challenges that crop up all the time. And I think health has come out to be a very critical sector that needs to be linked to trade, needs to be linked to the economic sectors, needs to be linked to the other sectors, rather than thinking that their work is in the hospital. Actually, more of their work is even now out there. And we need to have a common coordination mechanism in dealing with the movement of goods, movement of services, controlling epidemics, controlling the catastrophes and calamities. You've seen locusts, you've seen floods, you've seen all these things are interlinked with what we are doing from the policy perspective as far as the economies are concerned.
Thank you. Thank you, Ken. I think true to it that we need more coordinated approach at the regional level going forward. And I think this again will be depend on what Chairman Vimasha was saying, political goodwill, which is important. But on our part as businesses, we need to keep on, talking about it, things that we think needs to drive. And we place businesses or private sector at the center of the region as a driver of the region. It becomes more sustainable. And obviously now business takes over, and politics will be, of course, be used as, to support, but not really necessarily taking leadership in some of these regional things. So the last question goes to Professor Maggie. What they're asking participants is, do we need to have a regional emergency or specific emergency relief fund for SMEs, or we would rather have the national outfits, which is more practical? Is it a national outfit or a regional outfit that would serve as a very specific emergency relief fund for SMEs so that they could overcome this pandemic?
Thank you very much. Was that Professor or Aggie?
That is Prof.
Okay, yes. We have tried the local, each country having a fund. I think an East African fund looking at more cross-border, supporting the companies that are actually looking to do regional trade would be interesting. We do have the COMESA fund, for example, the COMESA PTA. We do have the East African Development Bank. I can tell you that our company at one point was saved by the East African Development Bank when the commercial banks would not touch us, and we were able to be funded and to save the company with the East African Development Bank. So yes, an East African fund that looks broader than just one country would be interesting. For the SMEs, I still probably the national level funds would be more helpful. They could access them more easily. They are known, some through civil society, some through the private sector, small banks, microfinance institutions. But government needs to be able to support that, to put the funds, which they have promised to do. We are just waiting for the implementation post-COVID maybe. So yes, local funds for the smaller companies, but if you're targeting export and targeting the region, I think an East African fund the East African Development Bank, and it will be able to support a larger number of regional exporting companies. I know Vimal said we should not call export trade in the region export. It is just regional trade. And then from there, we can benefit from the Africa Continental Free Trade Area once we've managed to access 160 million people in East Africa. So thank you very much, Peter. Thank you. Those asking questions, we enjoyed this session. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to, as we finalize, I want to thank all of you. I want to thank our panelists, one for creating time, and two for the content that they've shared with all of us as participants, and of course as East African Business Council. We've been organized for very thematic, of course, and sector-based webinars that would possibly support and help our businesses who now want to recover from COVID, but also bringing out how each sector has been affected. And once we do these reports, we'll be able to share with all of you and see where we are as East Africa and what we need to do, all of us. But thank you very much for creating time, each one of you. Indeed, this region belongs to all of us. We need to put the best we can, invest time, invest whatever resources, so that we don't shift our focus from Arusha to Accra. Yeah, so I think going forward, that is what we need to be doing. But Accra is a good idea as well. It's for all of us. And if at all we are all focusing and negotiating with Accra as East Africa, it's even better. And even we come out of this more stronger. Have a very good evening. Thank you very much for creating time. We are always there and look forward to, again, engaging very soon. Thank you very much, each one of you.
Thank you, Peter, and well done.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Maggie, it was nice knowing you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Peter.